Hi. Yeah, I think everyone can hear me. So thank you for being here. Good afternoon, and let's start with the talk. So the topic of my talk is how can you become a problem solver. But let's start. I'll talk a little bit about myself. My name is Carolina Pascale Campos. I work as a senior software engineer at Netflix. I am currently based in Brazil. I am from Brazil, so really happy to be here today, to be here at Copenhagen. It's been like great those days here. I really like books, coffee, and running, and the coffee here, I think, is the best that I have ever had in my entire life. So I had the chance to go to La Cabra, to April, to Prologue, and the coffee was just like outstanding. It was really, really, really good. So I think that's it about me. So I'd like to share with you what was the motivation for me to give this talk. And I believe that we as software developers, all the time we're hearing about new technologies, new libraries, language that we should learn. But sometimes we forget to focus our time on the most important thing, that is like delivering value to the business and the company that we are working for. So how can we better accomplish that? What can we do? What techniques can we use? What frameworks can we use? And frameworks here are like solving problem frameworks. I'm not going to talk about any specific technology to be able to deliver the best work possible and be seen as problem solvers in our company and not only like software engineers that only code. And I really do believe that we need to guarantee a seat on the table. We need to be able to have conversations with the product team, with the business team. And once we get that seat on the table, how can we keep that seat? How can we keep being important in those conversations? So the purpose of this talk is to share some of these techniques that I have been using throughout my career. And for me, they have been proven useful. I hope they can also help you in your day-to-day jobs. So what's going to be the agenda? First, I'm going to talk about alignment. How can you be able to get alignment on the problem you're solving? Then I'm going to talk a little bit about time management. After that, how can you better learn the context of the problem and the company you're working for? Some of best practice that you can use, and a little bit about soft skills. So let's start with alignment. First thing is to be aligned with what the business needs. So you need to be able to interpret and learn the context of the business you are working for. So you need to solve the problem, but you also need to accommodate the business needs. So some of the questions that I like to ask when I join a new company or a new team or a new problem that I'm trying to solve is, who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that we're solving the problem for? What they are hoping from the solution. So what's the expectations from the product manager? What are the expectations from the business analyst? What are your customers hoping for? So this is something that you should always have in your mind when you're solving a problem. What does success mean for this project? For some projects we work on, we need to be able to save costs. For some, you need to be able to deliver things in a really fast-paced way. So what does success mean? You need to be able to answer that for the project we're working on. Also, what are the most important dimensions you should be thinking when you're solving your problem? Do you have a lot of people that are going to be able to work on it? Do you have only 2 people that need to work on a proof of concept as soon as possible? So what are those dimensions? What do you need to think about? And also the timelines, right? Sometimes we have like really tight deadlines, so we need to be able to progress fast. Sometimes we have other teams involved, and they will be able to start in like 2 weeks. So how can you progress your work to be able to collaborate with other teams? What would happen if you miss a deadline? Sometimes we also say, oh, I have this deadline. You hear that from your PM, from the business people. But do you know what would happen if you miss that deadline? Sometimes it's a really big issue. Sometimes you're working with regulators, and they're going to get a really big fine. And sometimes just like a deadline that was created, but something has changed, a priority may have changed, and you can have more time to work on your problem. So that's something that I believe it's really important for us to have in mind. So be able to answer those questions. That's the idea. The other is to, once you have the business in your mind, once you understood that, how does your team work? That's also something that's really, really important for you to have in mind. And once I told those things, but your team needs to be able to answer those things. Because imagine you are in a planning, right? You are thinking about what are the tasks that you are going to work on your next sprint. If you have the questions that I just told you before, you'll be able to understand, are those the tasks that I should be working on? And also the team, right? Are those the requirements that we must deliver? Can we deliver value in a simpler and fast way to get early feedback? So once you have the business in your mind, you'll be able to answer those questions. You're not only receiving tasks from your PM, taking those and working on them without having the idea of the big impact they have. So that's something important. Everyone in your team must be able to answer those questions. Everyone needs to know if the tasks they are working on are the most important for that timeline. You shouldn't be waiting on our PM to tell you everything. After that, okay, we understood the business. Let's go with your team. How does your team operate, right? We know that some teams, they use dailies. Some teams, they decide to have no meetings day so they can focus on their work. Are we going to use some tool to track our project, like Jira or anything else? How does your sprint looks like? Before you go to the planning, do you decide to have like refinement meetings with your PM so you can really understand what are the tasks that you're going to work on? If you have unplanned work, like if your PM comes to you and say, oh, I have a great idea, can you work on it? How do you handle that process? Are you going to have dedicated capacity to work on technical debt? How do you handle the keep the lights on stuff that you need to do? So this is also really important. You need to think about how your team operates, and more important than this, you can influence that. If something is not working, you should be able to raise your hand and say, folks, we have like a lot of technical debt, we're not working on it. Or we are receiving a lot of unplanned work from our PMs, and I'm not being able to deliver the things that we planned on our sprint because of the unplanned work. So understand how your team works, sit together, have a meeting, and have those things written. That's something that I believe it's really important, and something that I use on the team that I work. That's called a working agreement document. All of those questions, you write a document explaining how your team operates. And why this is important, because then everyone is on the same page. Your team, your stakeholders, the people you work with, the teams you collaborate with. And if someone new joins, they will understand why you made those decisions, why it was important to have a no meetings day, why do you work with dailies. If a PM wants something new, how should they work with it? Should they sit with your manager and try to integrate that in the next sprint? So all of those things are important. And if they live on a document, it's much easier for everyone to be on the same page and really follow those rules. But also important to think it's a living document. As I told you before, you can raise your hand and say, some of this process is not working, and you should be able to influence that. Nice. So let's go to the second part. Let's talk a little bit about time management. How can we make the best use of our time? We know we have so many things to do. And how can you be sure that we're contributing to the right things? You are working on the right tasks, on the right projects. I think one of the worst things is when you end your day feeling that you're not able to accomplish anything important. You are really tired, you are overwhelmed, you have been in a lot of meetings, but you didn't feel that the work that you did in the week, in the day was important. You don't know why is this happening. So I really like this framework from Sherrera's Dosh that's called the LNO framework. And the idea, LNO stands for leverage, neutral, and overhead. What's the idea of this framework? Imagine all the things you have to do in your week. And then you have your tasks, right? What are the tasks that you are going to flag as leverage? Those tasks are the ones that you need to do a great job. This you need to be a perfectionist. Why? Because the effort you put will multiply by 10. So those tasks are the ones that you need to dedicate time into that. What are the neutral tasks? Same amount of time you spend on that task is the same amount of result you get. So you don't need to be a perfectionist here. And what's overhead? You need to get it done as fast and as easy as possible. It's just work that you need to do. So I'll show some examples and how can you flag your tasks thinking about this framework. So let's see how we can apply that. For the leverage tasks, understand what's the time of the day you are most productive. Do you have, for example, as I said before, no meetings day? If you do, use that day to do your leverage tasks. Why? Because you need to have time to focus on those. Avoid being interrupted, because those are the tasks that are the multiplier ones, right? The ones that you need to put effort because you see this paying off. So an example, imagine that you are working on a proof of concept for your team. You're doing a POC. It's a new project that your team will develop. You're testing if, like, some ideas, if they will work. Once you have this work done, everyone on your team will start to work on those in this new project. So that's a really important thing for you to do. So usually, that's an example of a leverage task, a POC. Focus your time on that, because this will pay off a lot. If we're talking about neutral tasks, those are, for example, the tasks of your sprint. It's important for sure, you need to deliver value, but it's not something that's going to multiply, for example, as a POC that is blocking a lot of people. They are extremely important, I'm not saying they're not, but they are the work you put in is the work that you are going to, is the rest you're going to get from it. So again, put focus time on your calendar. Those are really important tasks also, and they should never be postponed, because if you postpone it, your neutral tasks, you're not going to have time to work on your leverage ones. So get this work done. It's important, but not as the result will not be as bright as the work from the leverage one. And the overhead, those are the tasks that you should find time between meetings, for example, to work on those. Sometimes you have 30 minutes, then work on those tasks. So, for example, you went on an off-site and you need to add the receipts of that trip. It's a really boring work, but you need to do. Or you have some Slack messages that were not so important and you wanted then, you need to reply those. Take your time to do this. So, they are boring tasks usually, but you also need to get them done. But use those times of your calendar, the times that you have 30 minutes between meetings, use these times to do your overhead tasks. And what I also like to do is, okay, now I'm able to understand what's the kind of work I'm doing, and I add everything to my calendar. And why do I think that's important? Because, you know, when you open a lot of tabs and you just forget about reading, you don't know what were the most important ones, what I usually do is, if I find some document that's really important for me to read, someone wrote a document that I need to review, or find some article in the internet that's really important for my job, I add an event to my calendar with that link. So I know that at that time I will do that. I'm not only postponing things. And also for everything that I told you before, like those tasks, when I'm working on a Jira task that I got from my sprint, I add that. This is what I'm doing right now. When I'm working on my POC, I had a big focus time saying working on my POC. And why do I think that's so important? Because on Friday, when my week is ending, I can look at my calendar and understand, did I do a good job? What people were expecting from me, was I able to work on these tasks or not? And I get a really fast feedback on the work that I'm doing from myself. So for example, if I realize that I spent a lot of time working on an incident that week and I wasn't able to deliver the tasks that I was hoping to work on the sprint, I can already raise my hand before the sprint and say, folks, I was planning to do this work, but this is not working as expected. Or if we just have like a lot of meetings in our calendar and you can tell someone, do you see, I don't have a lot of time to work on the things that we are saying we must do. So if you have everything on your calendar, it will be much easier for you to understand what has been like the impact of your work. And I think that's a really powerful thing for you to understand why are you being able to accomplish a lot, or if you're feeling, I was doing a lot of things, but they were not important. And sometimes the reason is you're just working on a lot of overhead stuff, and you are in a lot of meetings, and you don't have time to work on things you'd like to. And this is also useful for you to show your manager why this is happening. Nice. So let's talk a little bit about how can you better learn the context. So one of the feedbacks that I got when I joined Netflix was how I was able to absorb context really fast when joining the new team. I have been working at Netflix for almost 2 years now, and I really do remember that when I joined, the first month was kind of chaotic. And when I got this feedback, I tried to understand, why did I got this feedback? What was I doing that worked? So first, I will talk about how I did with legacy code, and then we're going to talk about a greenfield project. So for legacy code, I really like this phrase that bad advice are advice without context, because I think it works really well when we're talking about legacy code. Many people, when they start working on an old project, a legacy project, inherited from another team, for example, their first attitude is to complain about how bad that code was. Like, this code is really bad. The architecture does not make any sense. All of those outdated packages, what were those folks thinking when they did this project? That's usually the first attitude. But the problem, when you say that, is that you didn't take the time to learn the context about this project before telling bad stuff about it. So the first attitude you should have is to talk with the right people and ask good questions for them to understand why those decisions were made. So first thing that I like to do, learn about the problem. So I think one of the worst mistakes we can have when we're trying to solve a problem is to try to come up with new architecture, new techniques, new things before understanding the problem we are trying to solve. So even when we're interviewing someone on a system design interview, it's a red flag when they start designing the solution without asking the right questions first. So why don't we do that on our day-to-day? I don't know. We usually prefer to complain first or to start thinking about the new thing before really asking the right questions. So I think it's really similar to a system design interview. We just need to remember to implement on your day-to-day. Because one of the worst mistakes we can have is after 2 weeks of work, we realize we didn't ask the right questions and we are solving for the wrong problem. So after that, okay, how can you do that? Talk with your stakeholders. So be sure you are taking the time to listen to different perspectives and different people before proposing this new solution. And do not think about code now. Think about what they work in their day-to-day. So, for example, imagine that you're going to work on an AML problem, anti-money laundering issue. Like, that's your context you are now. What would I do? So my first step would be to schedule a meeting with the AML analysts and understand how is the day-to-day work of someone that works with anti-money laundering. Now I'm not thinking about the tool they are using to solve the problem. I don't care. I just want to know how is the day of an analyst that works with AML. How they split their tasks, what the responsibility that each individual has on that team, what do the regulators expect from them, what does success for them means, right? What's expected from anti-money laundering in the end of the month? Okay, so that's the idea. I sit with them and I listen how is their day-to-day work. After that, I want to understand the workflow. Okay, I understand what is the main idea of your job. How do you do that? Now I want to understand what's the tool that you use. How do you leverage this tool to be able to accomplish this work? What are the benefits? What are the problems? What do you need to do to be able to deliver like a better job than you do today? So from maybe you're asking yourselves, isn't this a product manager thing? Like, why are you doing this? But being really honest with you, in my career, it was rarely the case. Like, usually, the product manager people, they are overwhelmed all the time. they have so many things to do. And if you take the time to learn those things, even if you say, oh, that's not my job, which I disagree, I believe it is our job, you are going to become the product manager best friend. And that's a great thing for you to be. So take the time to talk with the stakeholders. And if the PM wants to be with you, that's also great. The product manager can help a lot. But I think you're going to be able to make a much better job if you also incorporate that to your day-to-day. Now I want to talk about how does the system architecture work. Now I understand the problem, I talked with the people, and now I will try to find someone an engineer that worked on this old tool, or if I don't find anyone, also sometimes that happens, that's okay. I try to understand, at least with a bit more context about the problem they were trying to solve. And if there's no documentation, if there are no diagrams, no notes, you should. Now it's your time to start doing those things. So don't do the same errors again. Take your time to take notes about the product side, do diagrams about how it's working today and how do you propose for them to work on the future. So now it's the time that you are going to think about the system architecture. And after that, synthesize everything, this context you have learned. Synthesize the product part, the engineering part, add the important links, add the main stakeholders, diagrams, the technical depths you were able to realize. And now you can have a meeting with everyone involved. Now you're going to have the AML folks, you're going to have engineers, you're going to have your manager. But with that document, it's first much easier to realize if you have blind spots, because you talk with a lot of folks, when they read the document, they say, oh, Carolina, I think we forgot to mention this, and this is also really important. And because with the document, it's much easier to understand if you're able to get everything and you can start working on the problem, or if something is missing. But what is also great is that you didn't start schedule meetings with everyone, and sometimes you say, why am I here? You don't even have the time to talk about the technical part because it's your first time hearing about the problem. So try to first silo those discussions, and then once you have that document, you bring everyone together and start to thinking about how can you go forward. Nice. So that's the technique that I like to use when I'm talking about working on a legacy project. But how can we talk about a greenfield project? Sure, there are many things that I said here that you can reuse, but here we don't have like a system architecture that's already done for you, right? You're not going to being able to improve something or create something from scratch based on something. I think that's the main difference. So let's talk about having an RFC. So RFC, the idea is request for comments. That's what this stands for. I really like to have RFCs when I want to have big changes on a project or start something from scratch. So RFCs also work for legacy projects when now you're going to propose something new. First, start your RFC with the context, right? Here you're going to add everything you have learned about the product, about what you need to deliver. So that's the first part of your RFC is the context that you're going to share. After that, think about your proposal and have at least two. It's really good to be able to talk about things when you're comparing. So think about at least two proposals that could solve that problem. Add the goals of those proposals. What are the constraints of the solution you are proposing? Add the system architecture for it and have a brief explanation of every component. And after that, something that I really like to use, and I have used that some weeks ago, is to have a recommendation matrix. What does that mean? The idea is that you want to discuss about the trade-offs, right? Every solution has its trade-offs. And what we're going to do now is that we're going to think about 2 or 3 possible solutions and what are the attributes of what we're trying to solve and how those attributes impact the solution. I'm going to explain that better. I'm going to share a problem with you so we can discuss on top of this problem. I think it's going to be easier to understand. So imagine you are working on a company that has many partners that work with it, right? And those partners, they have access to our internal tools, but we also have third-party tools that they can also have access to. For example, Slack, Jira, we onboard, and once we have a new partner joining our company, they have access to our internal tools and also our Slack, our Jira. So we are licensing for them, right? They need to have a license to be able to log in on those tools. The problem is, now we have signed a lot of new deals. We're going to have 2,000 new partners onboarding our company, which is great, but this would imply on us spending $1 million with those third-party apps, because with those 2,000 new users, those licenses have a cost for us, and that would be more than $1 million. But we were not looking at the problem because we didn't have, now we only have like 4,000 users. That was okay. It was on our budget. But when we look at the data, we realized that in the last 3 months, 50% of those users didn't use Jira, for example. So we are paying for them to use, but they are not using it. And this happens because those partner users, some of them are salespeople, some of them are business. They're not interested in some of those third-party apps. How can we solve this problem? So we have this cost. Are we willing to pay for it? Are we not? And how would I use a recommendation matrix to be able to talk with all of my stakeholders and propose a new solution? So first, we need to think about the dimensions. What are the dimensions of this problem? What's the most important things we need to solve in our solution? And how do we prioritize those? So for each dimension that we think, we are going to list them in order of importance, right? For this problem, let's say that the most important thing is the cost to implement this solution, because we don't want anything really complex. Otherwise, it would be easier to just keep things as is and pay for those licenses. If you create a really complex thing to solve it, the time of the developers working on it may be more than the thing that we're paying for the licenses. So that's the reason we don't want anything really complex to solve this problem, right? Because otherwise, maybe we should say for someone, spend more time negotiating with Atlassian than creating code to handle those licenses. Second thing that we want to have in mind, the solution that we are proposing, does this really solve the license cost? Will it solve in the most effective way? Or maybe the solution that we choose, in 2 years, we are going to be on the same place. So imagine that we're just going to run a script that cuts 50% of the users. Maybe in 2 years, you're going to face the same problem again. So does the solution is going to really solve a license cost problem? And lastly, the user experience. How will the end user be impacted with your solution? Will that be seamless today? They will realize they are being kicked out or not? Will they need, for example, are you going to select someone from the company, let's say Samsung? The Samsung guy will say, those are my partner users that can have access to Jira. Are you going to put that burden on your partner? Do they need to keep track of how many licenses they have? So that's the user experience part. This is also going to be important for us. Nice. And what solutions are we going to propose for the, we talked about the dimensions. What are the solutions that we're going to propose? How those solutions interact with each of our dimensions? And what would happen if we decided to keep things as they are? So every partner gets access to everything. What would be the impact? Let's go. That's the result of a matrix, just for you to have an idea. Now we're going to go through it and discuss a little bit more. And just for you to know, you can have 10 possible solutions. You can have 10 possible dimensions. Here I'm just trying to make something shorter so we can discuss on top of that. But as you can see, it's visual, which is great when you're discussing with a lot of people. So the cost to implement, right? Maybe you're not going to be able to read, but I'm going to share with you the idea. So let's say we're going with an opt-in solution. So no partner users has access to this tool, and they will need to go to some management part and say, this, and this user now have access. This is the opt-in solution. When we talk about the cost to implement, the requirements we have are our partner users will need to have an interface to manage the users they want to have access to this third-party tool. We need to implement this interface. We don't have it today. A new backend service must be created to manage these users and keep those users in sync with this third-party solution, right? And we need to have a process to communicate with our users, email, Slack, something, because given that this license is going through a third party too, it's going to be a nice async process, and it may take some time to propagate. So maybe I'm the Samsung partner, I say, oh, Carolina can have access. It's not instantaneous. Maybe it take 5-10 minutes. We should send an email at least to the user. So that's how our opt-in solution this would be the cost to implement it. If we go with an opt-out, we say everyone get access, and we are going to cut when you're not using, right? So here the cost would be okay, less worse, because with this approach, we are going to use this third-party data to decide which users have access or not, and we're going to prune users every 3 months, right? So now, same as it is today. If a new partner joins, all of their users have access to our tool. But every 3 months, we are going to get the data from Jira, for example, and say, oh, those users are not using, let's prune them out. We are going to have their license revoked. We need to communicate with the partner users some days before, so if they log in, they will not be pruned anymore. And also, it's important to have now an onboard mechanism, because maybe you're going to be kicked off, but in 3 months, you are going to need that tool. So how can we re-onboard to that? And the third dimension, important to think, no cost. We're not going to change anything. Everyone can have access to the tool as it is today. Nice. Now the license cost, how would that work? If we go with that approach that the partner is going to decide what users have access to your tool, it's going to be complex, because we could limit, oh, this partner only have 20 licenses they can use. But, usually you have partners that are tier 1, they are more important, so they have 40 licenses. The tier 2 get 20. So a lot of questions start to arise. And also, when you continue growing, you are just landing this, you have a problem, and you are saying to your partner, solve the problem for me. You choose who should have access and who shouldn't. Not a really great way of solving that. That's a problem that we don't want to spend our money. Not a great idea to say to our partner, you select the users and not us. And they're always going to say, we need more license, please. So it's not going to be great. If we talk about the other idea, where I'm going to prune users that are not using that tool, then it's the perfect one for cost efficiency, because I will prune everyone that's not using, right? So only the people that really need to use their tool, we are only paying for them. We are not paying for people that are not using. So that's a great solution when thinking about license cost. And the worst is keep things as they are, right? Because I'm paying for people that are not using the tool. So it's the worst case scenario. I'm just paying a lot of money and people are not even using this. And talking about the user experience, it's bad if we just delegate that to our users. Today, they are happy. They join our company. They have access to everything. And now we say, you have a new job. You need to go select the users. If you want more license, you can deactivate one and activate other. So that's really bad for our users. They don't want to be concerned about that, right? The other one, the one that you prune users if they are not using the tool, can be a little confusing. One day you have access to the tool, 3 months after you don't have. That's also not great for our users. But we can think about having emails, having a better communication, so we can solve this with a better communication. It will take some time for it to develop, but it's solvable. And the other is the perfect for our users, right? Because they just get access to everything. The access is never revoked. So they really like this approach. So this is the result of the matrix after we analyze. But I hope you agree with me. It's visual, and it's great to be able to now have everyone on the same page and explain why some of this is good or bad. So you have the red ones here that you say, that's not the best solution. You have the greens and you say, oh, does this mean that the solution with more greens is the one that we should go with? Not always. Not always, because, for example, maybe we don't want to spend $1 more on this problem. And then we say, oh, So that's the dimension we are talking about, and that's a red one. So the idea with this matrix is that it's going to be a product of this analysis, the solution we are going to go with. So you see, you have no reds in the second one. And for me, for this problem that we're talking about, I believe the company would prefer to go with this one because they are really solving for the license costs. And that's okay if we spend some time working on new tools, adding some code to be able to deliver this one. So the recommendation matrix, I think the best thing is that everyone will take the time to read it and to say, okay, I understood why you chose this. The trade-offs are clear to everyone. So in 3 months, if someone asks you, but why didn't you do that? You can have the matrix and say, do you see, the cost was really important at that time. Because in 2 years, let's remember about the legacy project. Maybe in 2 years, it's going to be really cheap to have license on Jira, for example. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but just an example. And folks will say, oh, why did you create something so complex to handle it? And say, at that time, it would cost me $2 million. And now that the context has changed, I can go with just giving license to everyone. So that's the best thing about the recommendation matrix. The PMs, the engineers, everyone will be on the same page and understand this is the solution we should go with. It's much less noise. And the idea is in a 30 minutes meeting, you are going to be able to agree on a solution. And without it, it's much harder. And just always have that in mind. Have one of the columns as keep things as they are. Sometimes we realize that just like having things as they are today is best than creating a lot of complexity to solve a problem. So it's always nice for you to have a column where you analyze all those dimensions if nothing changes, how they would be impacted. RFC, right? So this is part of your RFC. After you decide on a solution, have milestones to be able to track your progress. The milestones will help when you're planning for your tasks. It's better for your manager to not micromanage you, because what really matters is, were you able to deliver this milestone that you had on your RFC? That's what really matters. So the the milestones will help you to understand if you're delivering the concrete value you are hoping for. So have that in mind, how to divide your milestones, concrete value that you want to deliver. So those are the things that will really help you have a good RFC, is to have the context, to have the solutions you are proposing, use a recommendation matrix to analyze the solution versus the dimensions that are important for that problem, and then, once you decide on a solution, have milestones for people to be able to understand if you're having progress on that or not. Now, for fourth part of my presentation, let's talk a little bit about best practice. Here, we're going to think about how can we, for example, keep learning in our day-to-day, right? One of the things that I really like, I was reading the Pragmatic Engineer book. It's a really good book. And before joining Netflix, I was reading it, and they say about having engineering day book. And the idea is that you're going to keep notes of the things that you did, what you have learned, new ideas that come to your mind, everything that's related with your day-to-day work. You are going to have a day book to keep track of that. So also, remember that I told you that on Friday Friday afternoon, I like to review my calendar. I also like to review those notes and see what have I learned, what are the things that were important. Maybe I took some note on a meeting really fast, and now I need to put that on the document. So I think that's great for you to go to your next week and to your weekend, being sure that everything that was on your mind, it's written somewhere. So it's really helpful to have an engineering day book. The other thing that I like to think is, I really like this phrase from the book, Getting Things Done, is that there is usually an inverse relationship between how much is on your mind and how much it's getting done. The idea here is that I always ask myself, does this take 5 minutes? Just get that done. Don't leave that on your mind like all the time. Otherwise, add that to your day book and add an alert that you need to work on it. Don't leave that on your mind. Put somewhere engineering day book, calendar, anywhere. Because the result is you get much better organized, much more productive, and you are sure you didn't forget about anything. It's really bad when you're having dinner and you remember, oh, there was something really important that I just missed it, because your brain is working all the time. So if you just keep notes of things, add things to your calendar, you will see how you'll get more done and you'll be less stressed about work after work. So that's the benefit. Like, you are all the time, we're on meetings, we are on Slack threads, we have documents. So the journal is really going to help you being sure you're working on the right things, right? Also, another thing that really helps me, so I'm talking about my experience, if I take notes during a meeting, I pay much more attention to that meeting than if I don't. So I'm on a meeting, I have my engineering day book open, and I start taking notes about important things that are happening. It really helps me when I'm taking notes, say, oh, I didn't quite understand what they were saying, and I can raise my hand and say, oh, I didn't understand. If I don't take notes, usually I just go through Slack, start reading other threads. So keeping notes will also help you be more focused. And if you, it will help you answer better questions, as I just told you, because you write and realize you didn't understood something. And the other thing is that you can revisit that, right? When you join a new company, a new project, you go on 3-4 meetings a day, and you forget about things. But if you took notes, you can go back on a time of the day where you, oh, my mind is fresh now, let me revisit that meeting. At least me, I never watch a meeting that was recorded if I were there, but I read notes. So I think it's much better to read notes than to watch an entire meeting that was recorded. And if you want to go one step further, and people will be really happy with you, do a summary of that meeting and send on Slack. Some people, they didn't pay a lot of attention. Some of them missing the open questions that you had on that meeting. If you send a summary on your Slack channel or any other tool that you use, people will say, oh, thank you. Some of them didn't join. Some of them were working on an incident that was more important. So I think that's one step further that you can take, is after every meeting, send a summary to the people that are that for them that meeting was important. Okay. So talking about how to have influence and impact, we want to have a seat on the table, right? So what I like to do when I join a project that people don't know me is start with quick wins with low effort. Because before you start to propose big changes to the project, before you start to being able to be assigned big things, you need to have the trust of the people you are working with, right? It's common that we change teams or we change companies, and if people don't trust you and you take really big things to work on, you're going to be really anxious, and maybe people will be frustrated because you didn't know things would take so much time. So start with the quick things. Start with the quick wins, low effort, because then people will be able to see that you are someone that they can trust, you are someone that deliver things that are important to the company. They will see you as someone responsible and responsive if they need anything. So I think that's great. When you start something new, go with the quick wins, because people will get to know you. Another important thing when working on legacy code, I really like this definition of working effectively with legacy code, is the idea that legacy code is code without tests. So when we are working on new tasks, we are always say like add tests to our code base, because this will help people that are joining the project. It will help people to know what that function was supposed to do. So, but one thing that I think is important for us is to understand that the importance of those tests. Why are we writing them, and how can we measure the quality of those tests? Because tests also have quality. So I really like because what we want to do when we're writing our code is to know if the program is doing what we expect, right? We need to understand the quality of this feedback. Is the program doing this? What's the quality of this conversation that I'm having with my tests? And here, I'm not going to tell you about 100% of test coverage, because this doesn't guarantee a lot. First thing that we want to have in our tests is accuracy. What does that mean? If a test fails, can you determine exactly which portion of the code has failed? How long does it take for you to say, oh, that was the part of the code that broke when this test failed? If you have granular tests, you're going to have more accuracy. If you have tests that test like 20 functions, it will take much more time for you to understand what flow has failed. If you have granular tests, you're going to get that fast. Usually, what we're trying to do here, small functions, no dependencies from the outside world. Unit tests here are going to be the ones that will help you with accuracy. Second is speed. The faster you find why a test is failing, the sooner you can identify why it is failing, right? So we want tests that are simple to write and to maintain and fast to run. Why I'm saying that? If you have a test that's failing and your pipeline is broken because of that, if it takes you 1 hour to run those tests, this will not be good. Like, you are not delivering value for all of that time, and when you change something, it will take 1 more hour to run. So you are just spending so much time on those tests that people will start to ask you, are those really valid? Because I need to get this by tomorrow. So it's not only about having tests, but having tests that are fast to run is also really important. So this is something important for us to have in mind. And the other is if we trust our tests. I think the worst kind of test that we can have is the one that sometimes they pass, sometimes they fail, and you didn't change anything on your code. So if you have tests that are unreliable, that's something that you cannot have. It's the same as having no tests, because you don't trust them. So if you have this case, stop and work on it, because otherwise your tests just they have no sense to exist. So think about that. So really important to have a suite test of, that's reliable, that every time gives you the same result if you didn't change anything. And from the pragmatic programmer, that's it. I really like this idea also. That's often the accumulation of small things that breaks more relevant teams. And the broken windows theory talks really good about that. The idea is that if you have one broken window that's left unrepaired for a substantial length of time, it instills its inhabitants of the building a sense of abandonment, a sense that powers don't care about that building, so another window gets broken. And then people start littering, graffiti appears, serious structural damage begins. So in a relatively short span of time, the building becomes damaged beyond the owner's desire to fix it, and the sense of abandonment becomes reality. So this usually can be related really well with technical debt. If you don't take the time to work on technical debt, if you're only working on the new and shiny stuff, in 1 year, your project will be kind of ruined, and no one will want to work on it. People say, it's much easier to just build a new one. We don't want to work on it. So it's really important for us to think about technical debt. And it's not, one also important thing for us to have in mind, technical debt is not only the result of easy implementation in the short term, technical debt is also adding premature complexity, and we get technical debt. So sometimes we're trying to solve for such a big problem when the reality is that you don't have any users today, and you're also adding technical debt if you're trying to solve for something that's really, really big. So have those two things, definitions in mind. Sometimes we just want to work things quickly, but sometimes we are just trying to over-index on something that should be easy. So always have in mind that we want to have architectures that are adaptable to the business growth, right? So we can easily incorporate those changes and find the time to work on technical debt. Otherwise, the broken window theory will be true in your project. And another thing that really helps with technical debt is the idea of having a closure document. Usually, when we are finishing working on a project, we just want to get rid of it. We say, oh, that's the last task. I'm going to be switched to another project that's more important, and you just run away from it. But one thing that I really like to do is to write a closure document when I'm leaving a project. What do we need to have on a closure document, and why it's that important is because sometimes we leave the small things behind. Sometimes we didn't have the time to work on those, and it's fresh on our minds. We're just leaving the project. So the idea here is that we're going to write what was done in that project, what was mapped and not done, and what would you work on if you had more time? What would be your priority? So what we want to do with that is be replaceable. Imagine that we're going to take vacations on the next week. Always try to have this closure document updated because it will help a lot once you leave that project and will help with not accumulating technical debt for the future. So, last part of the talk, let's talk a little bit about soft skills. Feedback. Feedback is something really, really important and has helped me a lot in my career. It's really important to give and to receive feedback well. So if you receive a feedback that's negative, just take your time to digest it. Don't go trying to explain yourself. Just listen, take your time, and talk with that person in the other day. I think it's great for you to have some time to reflect. And remember, people don't give feedback to people that if they believe they will not be able to improve. If I believe that you are something that's not nice working with you and never get better, I won't give you feedback. You only get feedback if the people believes in you. So have that in mind when you receive a hard feedback. They believe you can be better. Also, have that in mind. Be a good cross-functional person. I was telling you in the beginning of the talk, it's so nice when you know the analyst you work with, you know your product manager, you understand what they're going through. So, for example, with your manager, what's their day-to-day work? Ask them. Ask them, how is your boss's boss job? What's important for them? What are the business objectives? Take someone from business and ask them how to be closer with your PM to be able to explain why their requests are important, but why working on technical debt is also important. So if you have those relationships, it will be much easier for you to work and operate on a team. Also, I like the idea of trying to think as your manager would. So what I like to do is, like, if I see my manager trying to solve something, I ask them, how do you approach that problem? Like, you're trying to hire a new manager for my team. What do you think about? What are your expectations for this manager in the first 3 months, in the first 6 months? This is really nice because you can learn about how can you help your manager when you're doing that, how can you help someone on board on your company. So try to think as your manager would. And why not trying to be a manager for some time? So there's this article from Charity Majors that's called Engineering Manager Pendulum, which is really worth reading it. And I had that experience when I was working at Nubank. I was a manager for 3 months before leaving the company, and it was really nice. It was nice to understand why my manager was taking some decisions, why I was seeing her or his work not as important. And when I was there, I said, oh my God, now I understand their decisions. So it's really good for you to have more tooling to deal with situations. And if you sit on other people's seat, you can be able to learn. So being interested, learning and acting in different roles will make you a better professional. And how did I get this chance and how can you get? Or you don't need to become a manager, but if you want someday, what were the first steps that made that happen for me? One is always ask your manager, are you overwhelmed and is there something that I can help you with? The other one is have one-on-ones with other people in your team. In some companies, usually you only have one-on-ones with your manager, but it's really nice for you to one colleague that you work really closely with, you say, can we have one-on-ones every month? And then it's nice because you learn better about how other people in your team sees the problem you are having. You realize, oh, that's a really big problem in our team. Let's try to solve it together. So it's a safe space when you are with a colleague in a one-on-one to discuss those things, and you can even help them grow in your career, and they can help you grow in your career. The other thing is try to be a mentor in your company. How can you do that? Dedicate some time to other engineers and help them grow. So you can help them with topics like functional programming, if you're good with. You can help with English. In Brazil, that's usually something that we try to help other folks. You can help with distributed systems. This is something you're good with. The idea is to try to multiply the work you're doing, and we always can find some time to help other people. It can be in our team, in our company, or even outside, but that's something really nice for us to try to do. And the other thing that will help, sometimes the managers try to do that, is guarantee that everyone is on the same page. During meetings, in your documents, the idea is that we want everyone to be able to contribute to do the better work they can do. So that's why I really like documents, because it's usually easier for people to contribute and to add comments. So it's really important to be sure that when you are in a meeting, is everyone having the chance to speak? Is everyone understanding what we are talking about? So try to be that person on your team. And the result is that even if you don't want to be a manager, that's really okay, I'm not, you will become someone that's really important to your team. You'll become someone that people will count on, that people will trust you when they have problems, and I think that's really nice. It's a really great environment to have, and I think we can be more actionable about those things, and we'll see the results being great to our team. So that's the idea. I hope that it was able to understand the idea of thinking as a problem solver, because many times we don't need to be limited by our job titles. We can sometimes act as a PM, sometimes we'll be acting as a manager. This doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you solve problems for your team and for your company. I think that's the most important thing for us to have in mind. Thank you. Thank you.